We're going to be talking about is retroduction. It basically means that if we know what something is absolutely not, it's a lot easier to know what something is absolutely not versus what absolutely is. Okay, so what we do is that we just remove elements of the thing that we're talking about until we get to the one core piece of form or the core idea that's immovable, that if you took it away, it would totally break the thing that you're talking about. So this is what we do. So you basically take the claim and then you put it in different situations. So if somebody says, I love mountains, what you do is, oh, you like the Rocky Mountains? They're like, yes. Do you like the Andes Mountains? Do you like the Himalayas? Do you like whatever mountain ranges? Like, no, I don't like this. I don't like that. Well, what's the difference between that and there? Oh, it's because it's closer. It's in my backyard. It's in this. It's doing that because I don't have to do this. I do. Oh, great. So it's not because of the mountains. It's where the mountains are located in proportion to you and how easy it is to access those mountains without having to going through a whole bunch of barriers that you really don't want to go through. What would those be? There you go. So it wasn't about mountains. So you just took it and extrapolated it and tried to find what it was not. It's not the Himalayas. It's not the Andes Mountains. It's not anything in Europe. It's not anything in South America, anything in Africa. It's a specific kind of mountain range. What about the Appalachians? Oh, yeah, that's fine. Whoa, why is that? Then it guides everything else, and now you know it's not just mountains, it's in a specific direction. So burning away what is not can get you in the ballpark, okay? Remove elements until it breaks, okay? So basically if we talked about trumpets or trumpets or something, let's say, okay, we have a trumpet. Well, let's change the material. So we have a trumpet that's made of wood. That might break it, but it still looks like a trumpet. Maybe just an art piece, and then we'll just say, oh, it's an artistic wooden trumpet. Okay, fine. That doesn't break it. Okay, so it's not the material, it's the form. Okay, so what if we remove the valves? Still a trumpet. What if we remove the mouthpiece? Still a trumpet. What if we remove the bell? Nope. Nope. I don't think it would be a trumpet. So what is it? Well, and when you go back to the history, because this is the next one, is that if you look at the historical origins of where the thing came from, you can get a better idea of what the form is, of what the original form was. So if you look at trumpets, it was basically like a tube, a metal tube that they lifted up, they'd play the various series on it, and then they'd pick up a different one if they had to change keys or they had to play different notes. And that was considered a trumpet. Okay, so it has nothing to do with the valves, nothing to do with the mouthpiece, because the mouthpiece on the trumpet, well, it's still a trumpet even if you don't have the mouthpiece. It's not like it breaks, right? So it has something to do with the bell, something to do with the tubing, okay? So it's basically like a long tube with the bell and the flare at the end. That's a trumpet. And then the various size makes it a different instrument, right? There you go. Because French horn is also like that, because there's French horn with, instead of the rotary valves, you have the various crooks that you take out to change the pitch of the note. Okay? Now how do we find that? We got rid of elements until it broke the idea of what we were talking about. So you have the concept. Usually when you're like, oh, what is this? It's a concept. So if you take elements of that form away, you burn it away, you're going to be left with a principle at the very end that is the closest, or at least closer, to the absolute unmoving principle behind what you're talking about. So we could take this with a multitude of different ideas, and we'll find that, you know, the thing in the Oxford Dictionary might not be the closest thing that's completely coherent and wise. So the next one, yeah, historical origin, that also helps you define, because if it was made a certain way to do something, then you have a better idea of what it was actually supposed to execute, and then you have a better idea of the overall thing. So if you gather as much information on it as possible, that's great, because then you have all this information that you can just strip away. Like, does it break if I do this? Does it break if I do this? Does it break if I talk about this or this or this? So that's great. If you find a paradox, it's not, okay? It's either a spectrum of something. So if I had foolishness and wisdom, well, it's just a spectrum of wisdom, because you would consider wisdom the absolute good or something, right? And then foolishness as far away from wisdom as possible, but it's considered a relationship. Just like there's a relationship between small and big, just like if you had a pin versus a semi-truck, okay, small, big, but if you had a pin versus a molecule, of course the pin's way bigger in relationship. So it's just a relationship of an absolute principle versus the spectrum that's furthest away from it. And there's infinite degrees of that, of course, because degrees is a measurement and it's not really something you can measure because, it's a measurement, right? Cool. Oh, and another one, if you find a paradox, they might just be completely different. So you have, in politics, some people talk about this particular issue, and then the other side talks about a completely different issue, and they're pretending like they're actually having a debate when really they're doing this. Two trains going in opposite directions. This train going this way, this train going this way. You think they're going to crash, and then they don't because they're on different tracks. They're totally different. Not totally different. They're not completely but they're not talking about the same thing, right? Happiness and anger and disgust, those are all emotions. Those are spectrums. Those are on the same modality of emotions, right? When you have hamburger versus an orange, right? Well, one's a fruit, one's not. Okay, one's a composite, one's an actual. You could find that in nature. There's a whole bunch of distinctions in that. So it's not on a spectrum. The only spectrum that you would extrapolate the principle from would be that it's edible. Well, depending on the adjectives, probably not, maybe, whatever. Or at least they're a type of food. That would be the absolute. That would be the spectrum that they'd both be on. So if you okay, let's relate these together. Well, they're both food, right? It's like that Venn diagram, right? The thing in the middle, right? That's the principle that you could actually talk about, that they would actually be on the same plane. But if some guy's talking about this, some guy's talking about running, and some guy's talking about being really angry at something, they're not talking about the same thing. And, that's pretty obvious to see, especially when you get into the elements of each one comprised, when basically, which we'll get into the next one. So you use the meta model to find those distinctions, right? Because what we're trying to find is distinctions in the form and where the form breaks. Because an apple, when we think about it as a concept, of course we have, hundreds and thousands of apples, but there's always a transcendent principle, an unmoving principle of what an apple is, right? And then when we break down what that apple is or remove elements, it destroys the concept of an apple or whatever, right? And that's what we're going for, because usually we use this to fix problems, and problems are concepts, tend to be concepts, or we're figuring stuff out, trying to organize things. That's not particularly something that's physical exactly. The idea of how to fix it is metaphysical, but like doing it and like getting an idea, of course, that's metaphysical, right? Next one, as soon as you find absurdity, you found the distinction, right? That's also a good indication. So if something's like super absurd, if somebody takes, oh, I believe in this, and then you find a really absurd example, well, of course, then you found a distinction, a line, and that's how you can get rid of it. You can get rid of that, and then you can get to something pure. What it is not. You have this versus that. Oh, what is this in relation to this? This relation to that. Characteristic versus characteristic. So if you have two items or two things that you're comparing, you have all their characteristics. You lay them all out and see if they're similar or they're different. And then where they're different, quality versus quality. So attributions. People saying, oh, the shadow has this. They have attributes, but they really don't exist because they're just privations of light. Verb versus verb. Distinctions, right? A distinction is not. So basically, if somebody's running in a specific way and somebody's running completely differently, if you can find the distinction between those two, you find what the other is not. Cool. Categories. You can run through the Aristotelian categories. I had some of them here, but I didn't put them together. But you can literally read some of Aristotle's metaphysics, and then he'll talk about that. Aristotle's metaphysics is really good. Really good. There's like a golden nugget on every single page, and sometimes you have to reread a page because it's so dense. There's a lot of books out there that only have one interesting thing or one really cool concept, but if you want something that's valuable, exponentially valuable, you can look in Aristotle's metaphysics and you can have one after the other, after the other, after the other, and you'll fill up a notebook with all the cool stuff. And not to mention, you'll be able to extrapolate things and actually use them to think through problems. Not just, oh, this is what somebody believes or whatever. You actually have some tools to use. Because if somebody just gives you a house, it's different than knowing how to build a house. Okay? So if you read books like that, it's awesome. So that's basically retroduction, basically getting rid of things that it is not. The meta model also helps you do that because, they have nominalizations, breaking generalizations with finding a specific example, finding the distinctions between the specific example. Oh, it's not that because, and then they give you their justification or whatever, and then you get closer to what they actually think or know, which is interesting. Yeah, so that's basically retroduction. Hope you liked it.